The city was alive with energy, bustling like a living organism that never slept. It was a place where old traditions met modern technology, a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. In the heart of this sprawling metropolis stood the royal palace, an ancient structure surrounded by towering skyscrapers. The palace had been there for centuries, a symbol of power, history, and pride. Its golden domes sparkled under the sun, and its marble walls gleamed even after years of wear. Thousands of tourists visited every day, eager to see the beauty and grandeur of one of the most famous landmarks in the world. At the entrance of the palace, two massive iron gates stood open, welcoming visitors from all walks of life. Beyond those gates lay manicured gardens, fountains, and pathways leading to the main building. But before anyone could step inside, they had to pass through security checks conducted by the royal guardsmen. These guards were not ordinary soldiers. They were elite protectors who had trained for years to serve their country. Their uniforms, dark blue jackets with gold trimmings, white gloves, and polished boots, made them look both intimidating and dignified. They carried themselves with discipline, standing tall and alert as if statues carved out of stone. Among these guardsmen was Corporal Elijah Kane. He was 32 years old, with broad shoulders and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His skin was dark, a deep shade of brown that seemed to glow under the sunlight. People often noticed him because he looked different from many of the other guards. Most tourists didn't know much about the Royal Guard, but they assumed everyone in it came from similar backgrounds. When they saw Elijah, some were surprised or even confused, but most kept their thoughts to themselves. Not everyone did, though. Elijah had grown up in a small town far away from the capital. His childhood wasn't easy. Money was tight, and opportunities were scarce. But Elijah had always dreamed big. From a young age, he admired the royal guardsmen he saw on TV during national holidays. They looked so strong and honorable, like superheroes without capes. He wanted to be like them, to prove that no matter where you came from, you could achieve greatness if you worked hard enough. So when he turned 18, he joined the military. After years of rigorous training, he earned his place among the royal guardsmen. Now here he was, standing at the gates of the palace, fulfilling the dream he once thought impossible. But being part of the royal guard wasn't always easy for Elijah. While many people respected him, others treated him differently because of his skin color. Some tourists would stare at him longer than necessary, whispering behind their hands. Others would ask questions like, "Are you sure you're allowed to wear that uniform? Or do you really belong here?" At first, these comments hurt, but over time Elijah learned to ignore them. He reminded himself why he was there, to do his job and make his family proud. Still, it wasn't something he could forget entirely. On this particular morning, the weather was perfect. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the palace gardens. Tourists lined up outside the gates, waiting patiently to enter. Families took photos, children ran around laughing, and guides explained the history of the palace in multiple languages. Elijah stood at his post, scanning the crowd with practiced ease. His presence commanded respect, even from those who might have doubted him at first glance. Nearby, another guard named Marcus nodded at Elijah. "Morning," Marcus said casually. "Looks busy today." "Yeah," Elijah replied with a slight smile. "Always is on Fridays." Marcus chuckled. "True, just another day in paradise, huh?" Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on a group of tourists approaching the gate. They were dressed casually, wearing bright clothes and carrying backpacks. One man in particular caught Elijah's attention. He was tall, with blonde hair and expensive sunglasses perched on his nose. His shirt was untucked, and he walked with an air of arrogance, as if he owned the place. Behind him trailed a woman and two teenagers, presumably his wife and kids. Something about the man made Elijah uneasy, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As the group reached the security checkpoint, the man stopped abruptly. He glanced at Elijah, then at the other guards, before turning to his family. "Can you believe this?" he muttered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "They let anyone work here these days." Elijah froze for a moment, pretending not to notice. But the comment stung. He knew exactly what the man meant by anyone. It wasn't just a random insult, it was aimed directly at him. Around him, the other guards exchanged quick glances but said nothing. This kind of thing happened more often than they cared to admit. The man continued talking, growing louder with each word. "Seriously, I thought the Royal Guard was supposed to be the best of the best. Look at this guy." He gestured rudely toward Elijah. Doesn't exactly scream professionalism, does he? His family shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by his behavior. A few tourists nearby frowned, shaking their heads. One elderly woman muttered, "Shameful," under her breath. But the man didn't care. If anything, the attention only fueled him further. Elijah clenched his fists briefly before relaxing them. He reminded himself of the rules: stay calm, don't engage, and focus on the mission. Losing control wouldn't help anyone. Still, it was hard not to feel angry. Here he was doing his job perfectly, yet this stranger felt entitled to judge him based on nothing more than the color of his skin. "You need to move along, sir," Elijah said calmly, stepping forward slightly. His voice was firm but polite. "Security checks are required for entry." The man smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Oh, now you want to talk. Funny how you didn't say anything earlier. Maybe you're scared to speak out." Elijah ignored the jab. "Please proceed to the checkpoint, sir. Your cooperation is appreciated." For a moment, the man hesitated, as if deciding whether to argue further. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he motioned for his family to follow him. As they passed through the gate, he leaned close to Elijah and whispered, "You don't belong here." "Not really." The words hit Elijah like a punch to the gut. For a split second, he considered responding, but instead, he forced himself to take a deep breath and return to his post. Arguments wouldn't solve anything. All he could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. Little did he know this encounter was just the beginning. What started as a rude remark would soon spiral into something much bigger. Something that would test Elijah's patience, strength, and resolve. And when the moment came, he would have to decide how far he was willing to go to defend not only himself, but also the values he believed in. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Tourists continued to stream in, their laughter and chatter filling the air. For most people, it was just another day at one of the world's most iconic landmarks. But for Corporal Elijah Kane, the day was shaping up to be anything but ordinary. The encounter with the rude tourist, Victor Langley, had left a bitter taste in his mouth, though he tried not to let it show. He stood tall at his post, scanning the crowd as if nothing had happened. Inside, however, he felt a simmering frustration building. Victor and his family were now inside the palace gates, moving toward the security checkpoint. Guards directed them to form a line so their bags could be inspected. Normally, this process went smoothly. Visitors understood the importance of safety measures, especially at such a historic site. But Victor seemed determined to make things difficult. As he placed his bag on the conveyor belt, he muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous. What are they looking for? A bomb." His wife shot him a nervous glance, clearly uncomfortable with his behavior. "Victor, please," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Let's just get through this." But Victor wasn't listening. He turned to the guard stationed near the scanner, a young woman named Sarah, and demanded loudly, "Why do I have to go through all this hassle? Do I look like a criminal to you?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, her training kicking in. "Sir, these procedures are standard for everyone. We appreciate your cooperation." "Standard?" Victor scoffed. "Yeah, right. You're wasting my time." He gestured dramatically at the other tourists waiting in line. "Look at these people. They're here to enjoy themselves, not deal with nonsense." Elijah watched from a distance, his jaw tightening slightly. He knew exactly what Victor was doing. By making a scene, he hoped to draw attention to himself, and maybe even embarrass the guards. It was a tactic Elijah had seen before, though rarely so blatant. Still, he reminded himself to stay calm. His job was to protect the palace and its visitors, not argue with troublemakers. After what felt like an eternity, Victor finally cleared security. He grabbed his bag and stormed ahead, muttering complaints about inefficiency and incompetence. His family trailed behind him, trying their best to keep up while avoiding eye contact with anyone. For a while, things quieted down. Elijah returned to his usual duties, checking IDs, answering questions, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Victor wasn't done causing problems. Something about the man's attitude suggested he enjoyed stirring up trouble, and Elijah suspected he might be the target. Sure enough, less than an hour later, Victor reappeared. This time, he was heading back toward the gates, presumably to leave the palace grounds. As he approached, Elijah noticed the same arrogant swagger, the same dismissive expression, and sure enough, Victor didn't hesitate to start something. Well, Victor said, stopping a few feet away from Elijah. "Still here, huh? Thought you'd have taken a break by now." Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he maintained his professional demeanor, standing straight and meeting Victor's gaze without flinching. "Can I assist you, sir?" he asked politely. Victor smirked, clearly enjoying himself. "Assist me? Oh, I doubt that. You don't exactly strike me as the helpful type." A murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. Some tourists paused to watch, sensing that something was about to happen. Others quickly pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever unfolded. In today's world, moments like this often ended up online within minutes. Elijah ignored the growing audience. "If you have any concerns, sir, I'm happy to address them. Otherwise, I suggest you continue on your way." Victor laughed mockingly. "Oh, listen to him. So polite, so proper. Almost makes you forget what you really are." The comment hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Elijah felt his chest tighten, but he refused to rise to the bait. Years of training had taught him how to handle situations like this. Losing control wouldn't solve anything. It would only give Victor exactly what he wanted. "What I am, sir," Elijah replied evenly, "is a member of the Royal Guard. My job is to ensure the safety of everyone here, including you. If you have no further business, I'll ask you to move along." Victor's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flash of anger. Clearly, he hadn't expected Elijah to remain so composed. But instead of backing down, he stepped closer, invading Elijah's personal space. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Victor snapped. "Standing there in your fancy uniform, acting all high and mighty. But we both know the truth. You're nothing. Just some guy pretending to belong somewhere he doesn't." Elijah took a step back, creating distance between them. "Sir, I'm asking you nicely to leave. Please don't force me to escalate this situation." "Oh, escalate," Victor mocked, mimicking Elijah's tone. "Big words for someone like you." By now, the crowd had grown larger. People whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others nodding in agreement with Victor. A few brave individuals spoke up, telling Victor to stop being rude. But he ignored them, too focused on provoking Elijah. "You know what your problem is?" Victor continued, pointing a finger at Elijah. "You lack respect, real respect. Not the fake kind people give you because they feel sorry for you." Elijah clenched his fists briefly before relaxing them. He reminded himself that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "Respect is earned, sir," he said firmly. "And I've earned mine through years of service and dedication." "Dedication?" Victor sneered. "Is that what you call it? I call it luck. Someone probably felt bad for you and gave you this job out of pity." The insult stung, but Elijah didn't let it show. Instead, he glanced around at the gathering crowd. Many of them were filming now, capturing every word. He realized that this wasn't just about him anymore, it was about sending a message. If he let Victor walk all over him, it would send the wrong signal to everyone watching. On the other hand, responding aggressively would only confirm Victor's stereotypes. So Elijah chose a different approach. "Sir," he said calmly, "if you have a complaint about my conduct, I encourage you to file it with my superiors. Until then, I must insist that you leave the premises." Victor hesitated, caught off guard by Elijah's composure. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually walk away. But then his pride got the better of him. With a snarl, he reached out and shoved Elijah hard in the chest. The shove wasn't enough to knock Elijah off balance, but it startled everyone nearby. Gasps echoed through the crowd as people realized the situation was escalating. Even Victor's family looked horrified, urging him to stop. "Don't touch me," Elijah warned, his voice low but firm. "I won't tell you again." Victor grinned nastily, emboldened by the reaction he was getting. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, huh? Hit me." Elijah didn't respond. Instead, he raised his hand slightly, signaling to nearby guards that backup might be needed. Marcus, who had been observing from a distance, began moving closer, ready to intervene if necessary. But Victor wasn't done yet. He shoved Elijah again, harder this time. "Come on, tough guy. Show everyone what you're made of." For a split second, Elijah considered walking away. He knew that de-escalation was always the preferred option, but something inside him snapped. Enough was enough. No one deserved to be treated this way. Not him, not anyone. With lightning speed, Elijah grabbed Victor's wrist mid-shove and twisted it gently but firmly, forcing him to take a step back. Victor yelped in surprise, struggling to free himself. But Elijah held firm, maintaining control without applying unnecessary force. "I warned you," Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying authority. "Now, unless you want this to go further, I suggest you calm down." Victor froze, his bravado crumbling. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Around them, the crowd erupted into murmurs of approval. Some even clapped, impressed by Elijah's restraint and skill. Realizing he'd lost the upper hand, Victor wrenched his arm free and stumbled backward. "This isn't over," he muttered, glaring at Elijah. Then, with one last defiant glare, he turned and walked away, his family trailing behind him. As the tension dissipated, Elijah exhaled slowly, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. The situation had been handled professionally, but he knew it wasn't truly over. Incidents like this never were. They lingered, leaving scars that took time to heal. Still, as he returned to his post, Elijah felt a small sense of satisfaction. He had stood his ground, proving not only to himself, but also to everyone watching that respect wasn't given, it was earned. And he had earned it fair and square. The air around the palace gates felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken tension that lingered after Victor Langley's earlier outburst. Though he had walked away, his angry words and actions still echoed in the minds of those who witnessed them. For Corporal Elijah Kane, the encounter was far from over. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, some sympathetic, others skeptical, as he resumed his post. Despite his outward calm, inside he was anything but relaxed. Every fiber of his being was alert, ready for whatever might come next. Victor, meanwhile, hadn't gone far. After storming off, he had stopped just outside the security perimeter, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. His wife and children tried to reason with him, urging him to let it go and leave before things got worse. But Victor wasn't listening. To him, this was no longer about proving the point. It was about saving face. Backing down now would mean admitting defeat, and that was something he couldn't stomach. "I can't believe he touched me," Victor muttered under his breath, clenching his fists. "He thinks he's so tough, doesn't he? Well, we'll see about that." His wife sighed, exasperated. "Victor, please, just drop it. It's not worth it." "Not worth it," Victor snapped, turning on her. "Are you kidding me? That guy humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you think I'm just going to walk away like nothing happened?" Before she could respond, Victor made up his mind. With a determined glare, he marched back toward the gates, leaving his family behind. Tourists nearby noticed him approaching and quickly moved out of the way, sensing another confrontation brewing. Phones were raised again, cameras rolling as Victor strode directly toward Elijah. Elijah saw him coming, but didn't react immediately. Instead, he stood firm at his post, his posture unwavering. Inside, though, his heart was racing. He knew what was about to happen, and he knew he wouldn't be able to avoid it this time. "You!" Victor barked, stopping a few feet away from Elijah. His voice was loud enough to carry across the courtyard, drawing even more attention. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Manhandling me like that in front of everyone." Elijah kept his expression neutral, meeting Victor's gaze without flinching. "I acted within protocol, sir. You left me no choice." "No choice?" Victor shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "What are you talking about? You assaulted me. Me. Do you have any idea who I am?" Elijah didn't blink. "It doesn't matter who you are, sir. Everyone is subject to the same rules here, including you." Victor's face turned red with rage. "Rules? Rules? Don't talk to me about rules, you thug." The insult landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Around them, the crowd murmured uneasily. Some people looked uncomfortable, while others glared at Victor, clearly disapproving of his behavior. A few brave souls called out, telling Victor to stop being disrespectful, but he ignored them, too focused on provoking Elijah. "You know what your problem is," Victor continued, stepping closer until he was practically nose to nose with Elijah. "You think you're better than everyone else. You strut around in that uniform like you actually belong here. But guess what? You don't. You never will." Elijah's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. He refused to give Victor the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. Instead, he glanced briefly at the growing crowd, noting how many phones were pointed in their direction. Whatever happened next would be recorded and shared online within minutes. He reminded himself that his actions mattered not just for himself, but for everyone watching. But Victor wasn't done yet. Emboldened by the attention, and perhaps by his own misplaced sense of superiority, he shoved Elijah hard in the chest. The force of the push caught some people off guard, eliciting gasps from the audience. "Don't touch me," Elijah warned, his voice low but firm. "Do it again, and I won't hesitate to take action." "Oh, really?" Victor sneered, shoving him again. "What are you going to do, hit me? Go ahead. Show everyone what you're made of." For a moment, Elijah hesitated, Years of training had drilled into him the importance of restraint, of avoiding physical confrontations whenever possible. But there was a limit to how much provocation anyone could endure. And Victor had crossed that line. With lightning speed, Elijah grabbed Victor's wrist mid-shove and twisted it gently but firmly, forcing him to take a step back. The move was precise, calculated, not meant to injure but to assert control. Victor yelped in surprise, struggling to free himself. But Elijah held firm, maintaining pressure without applying unnecessary force. "I warned you," Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying authority. "Now, unless you want this to go further, I suggest you calm down." Victor froze, his bravado crumbling. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Around them, the crowd erupted into murmurs of approval. Some even clapped, impressed by Elijah's restraint and skill. But Victor wasn't ready to admit defeat. Fueled by embarrassment and anger, he lunged at Elijah, swinging wildly with his free hand. The punch missed its mark, but the intent was clear. Elijah stepped back instinctively, releasing Victor's wrist in the process. Now they were standing face to face, both men breathing heavily, the tension between them palpable. "You want to fight?" Elijah asked, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Fine, but remember, you started this." Victor didn't respond. Instead, he charged forward, aiming another clumsy punch. This time, Elijah didn't dodge. Using his training, he sidestepped smoothly and countered with a quick, controlled strike to Victor's midsection. The blow wasn't strong enough to cause serious harm, but it was enough to knock the wind out of Victor and send him stumbling backward. The crowd gasped collectively, some cheering while others watched in stunned silence. Victor landed awkwardly on the ground, clutching his stomach and wheezing for air. For a moment he lay there, dazed and humiliated. Then slowly he pushed himself to his knees, glaring up at Elijah with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," Victor growled, his voice hoarse. "Mark my words, you'll regret this." Elijah didn't respond. Instead, he straightened his uniform and turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, his voice steady and commanding, "I apologize for the disruption. Please continue enjoying your visit. Security personnel will ensure everything remains safe." His words had the desired effect. The tourists began dispersing, though many lingered to watch as palace guards arrived to escort Victor away. Marcus stepped forward, offering Elijah a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You handled that perfectly," Marcus said quietly. No one could ask for more. Elijah nodded, though he didn't feel triumphant. If anything, he felt drained. Standing up to Victor had been necessary, but it hadn't been easy. He knew the fallout from this incident wouldn't end here. There would be questions, scrutiny, maybe even backlash. But for now, all he could do was focus on his duty and trust that he had done the right thing. As Victor was led away, still muttering threats under his breath, Elijah returned to his post. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. The day had been long and emotionally taxing, but Elijah reminded himself why he was here. He had chosen this path, to serve, to protect, and to stand as an example of strength and integrity. And today, despite the challenges, he had lived up to that promise. The palace gates were quiet again, or at least quieter than they had been moments before. After Victor Langley was escorted away by security, the crowd slowly dispersed, though whispers lingered in the air. Some tourists stayed behind to take photos of the scene or discuss what they'd just witnessed. Others walked away shaking their heads, unsure of how to process what had happened. For Corporal Elijah Kane, however, there was no time to rest. The fight might have ended, but the real challenge was only beginning. As soon as the situation was under control, Elijah's commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, approached him. Reynolds was a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression that rarely softened, even in casual conversations. He motioned for Elijah to follow him away from the gates, where they could speak privately. "Corporal Kane," Reynolds began, his tone clipped but not unkind. "I need you to explain exactly what happened here." Elijah nodded, taking a deep breath before recounting the events. He described how Victor had provoked him repeatedly, ignored warnings, and eventually attacked him physically. His voice remained calm and professional, sticking strictly to the facts without embellishment. When he finished, Reynolds studied him for a moment, his face unreadable. "You handled yourself well," Reynolds admitted after a pause, "but you know this isn't over. People saw everything. Videos are already online." Elijah nodded again, bracing himself for what came next. He knew better than anyone how quickly incidents like this could spiral out of control. Social media would amplify every detail, turning a private confrontation into a public spectacle. And while some people might support him, others wouldn't hesitate to criticize, even unfairly. Reynolds continued, "Internal affairs will want to review your actions. I'll vouch for you, but be prepared for questions. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Elijah replied firmly. "I acted within protocol. I won't apologize for defending myself." "I believe you," Reynolds said, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder briefly. "Just stay ready. We'll get through this together." With that, Reynolds walked off, leaving Elijah alone with his thoughts. For a few minutes, he stood still, letting the weight of the situation settle over him. Around him, life at the palace resumed its usual rhythm. Tourists snapped pictures, children laughed, and guards patrolled the grounds as if nothing unusual had occurred. But Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that things would never quite go back to normal, for him at least. Public reaction. By evening, footage of the altercation had spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Clips captured every shove, every insult, and every punch, accompanied by hashtags like #StandWithElijah and #JusticeForVictor. Opinions divided sharply, reflecting the broader societal tensions around race and authority. On one side, many praised Elijah for standing up against racism and aggression. Comments poured in from supporters who called him a hero, saying he represented strength and dignity in the face of hatred. Finally, someone showed that racism has consequences. One user wrote. Another added, "This guard proved that respect isn't given, it's earned." But not everyone agreed. Critics argued that Elijah had gone too far, claiming he should have de-escalated instead of fighting back. Some accused him of being overly aggressive, while others suggested he had abused his position of power. A few even defended Victor, dismissing his behavior as frustration rather than racism. News outlets picked up the story, airing interviews with eyewitnesses and experts. Debate shows invited commentators to weigh in, often turning the discussion into heated arguments about privilege, bias, and accountability. Elijah's name became synonymous with controversy, and his image, captured in crisp uniform during the fight, was plastered everywhere. For Elijah, seeing his life dissected publicly was surreal. Friends sent messages of support, urging him to stay strong. Strangers reached out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and thanking him for inspiring them. But there were also hateful messages, filled with threats and insults, reminding him that not everyone saw him as a hero. Elijah's reflection. That night, Elijah sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the glowing screen of his phone. He scrolled through endless comments, both positive and negative, until his head spun. It wasn't easy to ignore the criticism, especially when it came from people who didn't understand the full context of what had happened. But what bothered him most wasn't the backlash. It was the exhaustion. Fighting racism felt like running a marathon with no finish line in sight. He thought about his childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and prejudice was rampant. Back then, he dreamed of becoming part of the Royal Guard because he wanted to prove that hard work could overcome barriers. Now, as an adult, he realized how naive that dream had been. Hard work mattered, yes, but so did resilience. No matter how much progress society made, there would always be people like Victor determined to tear others down. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Marcus, his fellow guard and close friend. Without waiting for an invitation, Marcus stepped inside and handed Elijah a cup of coffee. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked, sitting down across from him. Elijah shrugged. "I've been better." Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, I figured. Look, I know this must feel overwhelming, but don't let the noise get to you. You did the right thing." "That's not what everyone thinks," Elijah muttered, gesturing toward his phone. "Doesn't matter what everyone thinks," Marcus countered. "What matters is that you stood your ground. You didn't back down, and you didn't lose control. That's more than most people can say." Elijah sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if anything will ever change. Racism feels like a wall you can't break through, no matter how hard you try." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe, but walls crack over time. Every time someone stands up to hate, they chip away at it. Today, you chipped away at it big time." Elijah managed a faint smile, grateful for Marcus's encouragement. Still, he couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. Being a role model wasn't something he'd signed up for. It had simply become part of his reality. And while he was proud of his achievements, the constant pressure to represent his community weighed on him. Internal Affairs Review. The next morning, Elijah reported to headquarters for an internal review meeting. The room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. Sitting across from him were three senior officers, each armed with a notebook and pen. They greeted him politely, but wasted no time diving into questions. Corporal Kane, one officer began. We've reviewed the video footage and statements from witnesses. Can you elaborate on why you chose to engage physically with Mr. Langley? Elijah repeated his account, emphasizing that Victor's repeated provocations left him no choice but to defend himself. He explained that he had tried to de-escalate multiple times but ultimately needed to protect his safety and the integrity of the Royal Guard. And you're confident that your actions align with our protocols? Another officer asked. Yes, sir, Elijah replied without hesitation. At no point did I act outside my training or responsibilities. After nearly an hour of questioning, the officers concluded the session. One of them offered a reassuring nod. Thank you, Corporal. We'll review everything and provide updates shortly. Though the meeting went smoothly, Elijah couldn't relax entirely. Internal reviews were standard procedure, but they weren't foolproof. Depending on how the investigation unfolded, there was always a chance his career could suffer. He reminded himself to focus on the facts and trust that justice would prevail. Support from unexpected places. Later that week, Elijah received unexpected visitors at the palace gates, a group of activists advocating for racial equality. They brought banners and signs praising his courage, calling him a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. At first, Elijah felt uncomfortable with the attention, unsure of how to respond. But as he listened to their stories and shared his own experiences, he realized the importance of solidarity. These strangers weren't just supporting him, they were fighting alongside him for a better future. Even some of his colleagues surprised him. Guards who had previously kept their distance now approached him, offering words of encouragement. One older officer patted him on the back and said, "You're making us all proud, son." These gestures, though small, meant the world to Elijah. They reminded him that he wasn't alone, that there were good people willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Looking ahead, as days passed, the initial frenzy surrounding the incident began to fade. News cycles moved on, and the spotlight shifted elsewhere. But for Elijah, the experience left a lasting impact. He understood now more than ever the power of representation and the responsibility that came with it. Whether he liked it or not, his actions had inspired countless individuals to confront prejudice in their own lives. Still, Elijah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more battles to fight. But he also knew that giving up wasn't an option. For every person who doubted him, there were dozens who believed in him. And that belief gave him strength. Standing at his post once again, Elijah gazed out at the bustling city beyond the palace gates. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Despite everything, he felt a flicker of hope. Change might be slow, but it was possible, and he intended to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The days following the incident at the palace gates felt like a blur to Corporal Elijah Kane. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a heavy mix of emotions that weighed on him more than he cared to admit. On the surface, life continued as usual. Tourists came and went, guards patrolled their posts, and the palace remained a symbol of stability and tradition. But for Elijah, nothing felt quite the same anymore. He found himself replaying the altercation with Victor Langley over and over in his mind. Each time he analyzed what he could have done differently, whether he should have ignored Victor's insults longer, whether he should have walked away instead of engaging physically. No matter how many times he revisited the scene, though, one truth remained clear. Victor had left him no real choice. Still, that didn't make the aftermath any easier to bear. At night, when the city quieted down and the palace grounds were bathed in soft moonlight, Elijah often sat alone in his apartment, staring out the window. His thoughts wandered back to his childhood, the small town where he'd grown up, the struggles his family faced, and the dreams that had driven him to join the Royal Guard. He remembered the pride he'd felt when he first donned the uniform, standing tall alongside men and women who shared his dedication to service. Back then, he believed that hard work and determination would be enough to earn respect. Now, he wasn't so sure. The weight of representation. Elijah couldn't escape the feeling that he represented something bigger than himself. As a black man in a predominantly white institution, he was used to being noticed. People often assumed he had an easier path because of affirmative action or quotas, even though he'd worked tirelessly to prove himself. Every promotion, every commendation, he'd earned them all through sheer effort and skill. Yet no matter how much he achieved, There were always whispers, doubts, and stereotypes waiting to undermine him. The altercation with Victor had brought those feelings rushing back. It wasn't just about one man's racism. It was about the larger system that allowed such attitudes to persist. Elijah realized now more than ever how exhausting it was to constantly fight against prejudice, not just in moments of outright conflict, but in everyday interactions too. The subtle comments, the sideways glances, the assumptions people made based on his skin color, they added up over time, chipping away at his patience and energy. Sometimes, Elijah wondered if things would ever truly change. Society talked a lot about equality and justice, but actions rarely matched words. For every step forward, it seemed like there were two steps back. And yet, despite the frustration, Elijah refused to give up hope entirely. If nothing else, he owed it to himself, and to those who looked up to him, to keep pushing forward. Finding strength in support. Though Elijah preferred to handle his emotions privately, he wasn't completely alone. Friends, family, and colleagues reached out to check on him, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Marcus, in particular, became a constant source of support. They spent hours talking late into the night, sharing stories and reflecting on their own experiences with discrimination. Marcus said one evening as they sat on Elijah's balcony, sipping coffee, "It's funny how some people think we're immune to this stuff just because we wear uniforms. Like putting on this jacket magically makes us invincible." Elijah chuckled softly. "Yeah, I get that a lot. People assume I don't feel pain or anger because I'm supposed to be strong. But the truth is, it hurts. Every insult, every doubt, it adds up." "I hear you," Marcus replied, nodding. "But here's the thing. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who doesn't have a voice. That's why people admire you, Elijah. You remind them that they're not alone." Elijah sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I never asked for that kind of responsibility. Sometimes I wish I could just do my job without worrying about what everyone else thinks." "I know," Marcus said gently. "But the fact that you carry that weight and still stand tall, that's what makes you special. Not everyone can do that." Their conversations helped Elijah process his emotions, reminding him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. In fact, opening up allowed him to connect with others on a deeper level. Slowly but surely, he began to see that he wasn't carrying this burden alone. A visit from home. One weekend, Elijah received an unexpected visit from his younger sister, Naomi. She had traveled all the way from their hometown just to see him, bringing homemade meals and warm hugs. Sitting together in his living room, they talked about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. "You've always been my hero, Elijah," Naomi said, her eyes shining with admiration. "Even when things got tough, you never gave up. Seeing you stand up to that guy at the palace, it made me so proud." Elijah smiled faintly, touched by her words. "Thanks, sis. That means a lot. But I also know how hard it must be for you," she added, her tone turning serious. "You can't let people drag you down, okay? You've worked too hard to let anyone take that away from you." Her words struck a chord deep within Elijah. Growing up, Naomi had always looked up to him, seeing him as a role model. Now, as an adult, she reminded him of why he'd chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't just about personal success. It was about paving the way for others, showing them that barriers could be broken with perseverance and courage. By the time Naomi left, Elijah felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Her visit reminded him of the love and support he had back home, a foundation he could always rely on, no matter how challenging life became. Facing doubts head on. Despite the encouragement from loved ones, Elijah still struggled with moments of self-doubt. Late at night, when the world was silent and his thoughts ran wild, he questioned whether he was making a difference. Was standing up to Victor worth the backlash? Would anyone truly remember what had happened once the headlines faded? To combat these doubts, Elijah started journaling. He wrote about his experiences, his fears, and his hopes for the future. Putting his thoughts into words helped him gain clarity, allowing him to see the bigger picture. Over time, he realized that change didn't happen overnight. Progress was slow, messy, and often frustrating, but it was still progress. He also drew strength from the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. Historical figures like Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King Jr. inspired him to keep fighting, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Their legacies proved that standing up for justice, no matter how daunting, could leave a lasting impact on the world. Preparing for what's next. As the investigation into the altercation continued, Elijah focused on staying grounded. He attended mandatory counseling sessions, which gave him a safe space to express his emotions without judgment. The counselor praised his resilience, reminding him that healing took time and patience. Meanwhile, Elijah threw himself into his work, determined to maintain his professionalism despite the scrutiny. His fellow guards noticed his dedication, rallying around him with unwavering support. Even Captain Reynolds checked in regularly, ensuring Elijah knew he had the backing of the entire team. "You're stronger than you think, Corporal," Reynolds told him during one of their meetings. "Don't let this define you. Use it as fuel to keep moving forward." Elijah nodded, grateful for the guidance. Deep down, he knew Reynolds was right. While the incident had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, it had also revealed his inner strength. He might not have chosen this path, but he was determined to walk it with dignity and purpose. A glimmer of hope. One morning, as Elijah stood at his post watching the sunrise, he felt a renewed sense of resolve. The sky was painted in vibrant hues of orange and pink, signaling the start of a new day. Tourists trickled in slowly, smiling and chatting excitedly as they approached the palace gates. For the first time in weeks, Elijah allowed himself to smile too. He understood now that the fight against racism wouldn't end with him, or with anyone for that matter. It was a collective effort requiring courage, compassion, and persistence from everyone involved. And while he couldn't control how others behaved, he could control how he responded. By standing firm in his values and refusing to let hatred win, he was contributing to a better future, one small step at a time. As he greeted visitors with a polite nod, Elijah reminded himself of the lesson he learned. True strength wasn't about avoiding pain or fear. It was about facing them head-on and emerging stronger on the other side. With that thought in mind, he turned his attention back to the bustling crowd, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the altercation at the palace gates were tense for Corporal Elijah Kane. While he had returned to his duties with professionalism, the shadow of the investigation loomed over him. Every knock on his apartment door or call from headquarters made his heart race slightly faster. He knew that justice wasn't guaranteed. It rarely was when racism reared its ugly head. But he also knew that the truth was on his side, and he clung to that as he prepared for what lay ahead. Finally, the day arrived. A formal hearing was scheduled to address the events surrounding the altercation between Elijah and Victor Langley. The case had drawn significant attention, not just locally but internationally. News outlets covered every detail, framing it as a pivotal moment in discussions about racial bias and accountability. For Elijah, this meant walking into a courtroom filled with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness how the story would unfold. Inside the courtroom, Elijah entered the courthouse wearing his Royal Guard uniform, a symbol of both his profession and his integrity. Around him, cameras flashed, capturing his calm demeanor as he took his seat alongside his lawyer, Ms. Rachel Bennett. She was a sharp and experienced attorney known for her work in civil rights cases. Her presence gave Elijah confidence, though he couldn't shake the nervous energy buzzing inside him. On the other side of the room sat Victor Langley, flanked by his own legal team. Victor looked different now, not as arrogant or cocky as he had been at the palace gates. Instead, he appeared agitated, glancing around the crowded courtroom with a mix of defiance and discomfort. His family sat quietly behind him, their expressions unreadable. As the judge called the court to order, the room fell silent. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Everyone understood the stakes. This wasn't just about two individuals. It was about principles of fairness, equality, and accountability. The testimony begins. The prosecution began by presenting evidence, including video footage of the altercation and statements from eyewitnesses. The clips showed Victor's repeated provocations, his physical aggression, and Elijah's measured response. Each frame painted a clear picture of what had happened, leaving little room for doubt. Next, it was Elijah's turn to testify. As he stepped up to the stand, he felt dozens of eyes on him. Some were supportive, others skeptical, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. Under Ms. Bennett's guidance, he recounted the events calmly and clearly, sticking to the facts without embellishment. "Corporal Kane," Ms. Bennett began, "can you describe your state of mind during the incident?" "I was focused on maintaining order and ensuring everyone's safety," Elijah replied steadily. "Mr. Langley's behavior escalated quickly, and I repeatedly warned him to stop. When he physically attacked me, I acted within protocol to protect myself." "And did you intend to harm Mr. Langley?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Elijah said firmly. "My goal was to neutralize the threat and restore control. I used only the force necessary to subdue him." Ms. Bennett nodded, then turned to face the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Corporal Kane acted exactly as someone in his position should have. He demonstrated restraint, professionalism, and adherence to protocol, even in the face of blatant provocation. When the defense cross-examined Elijah, they tried to paint him as overly aggressive, suggesting that he could have avoided the confrontation altogether. But Elijah remained composed, countering their arguments with logic and clarity. "You're saying I should have walked away?" Elijah asked at one point, his tone respectful but firm. "That would have sent the message that aggression and racism are acceptable, as long as you target the right person. I couldn't let that happen." His words resonated with many in the courtroom, earning nods of approval from spectators. Even the judge seemed impressed by his poise under pressure. Victor takes the stand. After Elijah's testimony came Victor's turn. Flanked by his lawyers, he struggled to explain his actions. At first, he attempted to downplay his behavior, claiming he had simply been frustrated by security delays. But when confronted with the videos showing his racist remarks and physical attacks, his excuses crumbled. "Why did you shove Corporal Kane multiple times?" the prosecutor asked pointedly. Victor hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I didn't mean to cause trouble," he stammered. "I was upset, and things got out of hand." "And yet we see you escalating the situation repeatedly," the prosecutor pressed. "You insulted Corporal Kane, pushed him, and even threw punches. Did you believe your actions were justified?" Victor opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, unable to find an answer. The damage was done. His attempts to deflect responsibility only highlighted his guilt, making it clear to everyone in the room that he had crossed a line. Closing arguments. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides delivered their closing arguments. The prosecution emphasized the importance of holding individuals accountable for hate speech and violence, arguing that Victor's actions represented a larger societal issue that needed addressing. "Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing," the prosecutor declared passionately. "It's about sending a message that racism and aggression will not be tolerated, especially against those who dedicate their lives to protecting us." Corporal Kane stood his ground because he believed in doing what was right. Shouldn't we do the same? In contrast, the defense argued that Victor's behavior, while regrettable, didn't warrant severe consequences. They urged leniency, portraying him as a man who had momentarily lost control rather than someone acting out of malice. But their pleas fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. The verdict. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the foreman stood to announce the verdict. "We find the defendant, Mr. Victor Langley, guilty on charges of assault and hate speech," the foreman stated, his voice ringing through the silent room. A wave of relief washed over Elijah as murmurs of approval spread among the spectators. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. Justice had been served, not just for him but for anyone who had ever faced discrimination and wondered if anyone cared. Victor, meanwhile, slumped in his chair, visibly defeated. The judge sentenced him to community service, mandatory anti-racism training, and a substantial fine. While some might have considered the punishment light, Elijah saw it as a step in the right direction. Accountability mattered, and today Victor had been held accountable. Public reaction. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Elijah, eager for his reaction. He spoke briefly, thanking the court for its decision and expressing hope that the case would inspire meaningful conversations about racism and respect. "This isn't about me," Elijah told the crowd. "It's about standing together against hatred and injustice. If my experience can help spark change, then it was worth it." His words resonated widely, sparking debates and discussions across social media and news platforms. Many praised Elijah for his courage and dignity, hailing him as a role model for marginalized communities. Activists seized the opportunity to push for reforms, calling for stricter measures against hate crimes and systemic bias. Even within the Royal Guard, attitudes began shifting. Senior officers acknowledged the need for greater diversity and inclusion, pledging to implement new training programs and initiatives. Elijah found himself at the center of these efforts, tasked with helping shape policies that promoted fairness and equality. Finding closure. With the trial behind him, Elijah finally allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened. It had been a grueling journey, one marked by frustration, self-doubt, and moments of triumph. But through it all, he had stayed true to his values, refusing to let hatred define him. One evening, as he stood at the palace gates watching the sunset, Marcus approached him with a warm smile. Feels good to have closure, doesn't it? Elijah nodded, returning the smile. Yeah, it does. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt powerless. Today, we proved that standing up matters. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. You've always been stronger than you think, brother. Never forget that. As the city lights flickered on, casting a golden glow over the palace grounds, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never was, but he was ready to keep fighting. For every challenge, there was an opportunity to grow. And for every act of hate, there was a chance to respond with love, courage, and resilience. Months had passed since the trial, and life at the palace gates had settled into a new rhythm. The incident involving Corporal Elijah Kane and Victor Langley was no longer headline news, but its impact lingered in both subtle and profound ways. For Elijah, it marked not just an end to a difficult chapter, but also the beginning of something bigger, a chance to shape a better, fairer world. The Royal Guard, once seen as a bastion of tradition, was now undergoing significant changes. Inspired by the public discourse sparked by Elijah's case, senior officers recognized the need for reform. They began implementing initiatives aimed at fostering diversity, inclusion, and accountability within their ranks. Training programs were updated to address racial bias, gender equality, and cultural sensitivity. Recruitment efforts expanded to reach communities that had long been underrepresented in the institution. Elijah found himself at the forefront of these efforts. His leadership, resilience, and integrity made him a natural choice to spearhead the changes. He was promoted to a higher rank, tasked with mentoring younger recruits and ensuring that the values of respect and fairness became ingrained in every aspect of the Guard's operations. It wasn't always easy. Resistance came from some quarters, but Elijah remained steadfast, knowing that progress required persistence. A new generation. One of Elijah's proudest achievements was the creation of a mentorship program designed to support minority recruits. Many of them entered the academy with dreams similar to his own, to serve their country with honor and make a difference. But they often faced challenges unique to their backgrounds, stereotypes, isolation, and self-doubt. Elijah understood those struggles intimately, and he made it his mission to ensure no one felt alone. Each week, he held informal sessions where recruits could share their experiences and concerns. These meetings weren't mandatory, but attendance grew steadily as word spread about Elijah's openness and empathy. Recruits admired him, not just for his skill and dedication, but also for his willingness to listen and learn. You don't have to be perfect, Elijah told them during one session. None of us are. What matters is that you keep pushing forward, even when things get tough. And remember, you're not just doing this for yourself. You're paving the way for others who will come after you. His words resonated deeply, inspiring many to embrace their roles with renewed determination. Slowly but surely, the Guard began to reflect the diversity of the nation it served, a change that didn't go unnoticed by the public. Public recognition. Elijah's actions hadn't gone unrecognized outside the palace walls either. Activists hailed him as a symbol of resistance against racism and injustice, while educators included his story in discussions about courage and representation. Award ceremonies celebrated his contributions, though Elijah accepted them humbly, always redirecting praise to the collective effort behind the reforms. It's not about me, he would say whenever asked about his achievements. It's about everyone who believes in equality and works toward it every day. I'm just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Despite his modesty, Elijah couldn't deny the ripple effect his story had created. People from all walks of life reached out to thank him, sharing how his stand against Victor had inspired them to confront prejudice in their own lives. Some wrote letters, others sent messages online, and a few even visited the palace gates just to shake his hand. Each interaction reminded Elijah of the power of standing up for what was right, even when it felt daunting. Personal growth. While Elijah took pride in the changes happening around him, he also experienced personal growth. The months following the trial had given him time to heal, not just from the stress of the incident, but also from years of accumulated pain and frustration. Therapy sessions helped him process lingering emotions, teaching him tools to manage doubt and exhaustion. Friends and family continued to rally around him, offering unwavering support. He also rediscovered joy in small moments. Whether it was enjoying a quiet evening with Naomi, laughing over coffee with Marcus, or watching tourists marvel at the palace gardens, Elijah learned to savor life's simplicity. These moments reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place, to protect and serve, not out of obligation, but out of love for humanity. A symbol of hope. As the seasons changed, so did the faces at the palace gates. More black, brown, and female guards joined the team, bringing fresh perspectives and energy. Visitors noticed the shift, often commenting on how the guard felt more approachable and representative of the community. Children pointed excitedly at the diverse lineup, their eyes wide with admiration. For Elijah, these interactions filled him with hope. He saw glimpses of a future where barriers would continue to fall and opportunities would expand for everyone. One morning, as Elijah stood at his post greeting visitors, a young boy approached him shyly. The child, no older than 8, wore a toy soldier uniform and clutched a drawing in his hand. "Are you Corporal Kane?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am," Elijah replied, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "What can I do for you?" The boy extended the drawing toward him. It depicted a figure in a Royal Guard uniform standing tall against a backdrop of stars and stripes. At the bottom, scrawled in crayon, were the words, "Thank you for being brave." Elijah felt a lump rise in his throat as he accepted the artwork. "This is amazing," he said, smiling warmly. "Did you draw this yourself?" The boy nodded proudly. "My mom says you're a hero. She says you teach people to be kind." Elijah chuckled softly, touched by the innocence and sincerity of the moment. "Well, your mom is very wise. Being kind is one of the most important things we can do." The boy beamed before running back to his mother, who waved gratefully at Elijah. As he watched them walk away, he tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket, vowing to keep it as a reminder of why he fought for change. Looking ahead. Though progress had been made, Elijah knew the journey was far from over. Racism, bias, and inequality still existed. They were deeply rooted problems that wouldn't disappear overnight. But he believed in the power of incremental steps. Every policy change, every act of kindness, and every voice raised in protest chipped away at the walls of injustice. Standing at the palace gates on a crisp autumn morning, Elijah gazed out at the bustling city beyond. The sun cast golden light across the skyline, illuminating streets filled with people from all walks of life. Tourists snapped photos, vendors called out to passers-by, and children played tag in the square. It was a scene of unity and diversity, a testament to the resilience of humanity. Elijah allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought about his childhood dreams, the challenges he'd overcome, and the legacy he hoped to leave behind. He imagined a future where no one had to fight twice as hard to prove they belonged, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where justice truly meant equality for all. With a deep breath, he straightened his posture and returned to his duties. The road ahead would require patience, perseverance, and faith. But Elijah was ready. He had walked through fire and emerged stronger, armed with the knowledge that even the smallest acts of courage could spark monumental change. As the day unfolded, Elijah greeted each visitor with a smile, his heart full of gratitude and hope. The palace gates stood open, welcoming all who sought to experience its beauty and history. And standing tall beside them was Corporal Elijah Kane, a guardian of tradition, a champion of justice, and a beacon of hope for a brighter tomorrow.